Só um minutinho, eu vou dar um recadinho. Com relação à questão do almoço, no mercado público, a gente tem não tem um convênio, mas é um agrado, um restaurante que vai dar um desconto pra gente. Né? Então, assim, quem tiver, eu vou passar uma listinha, um papelzinho, coloca o nome para eu saber quantas pessoas e eu já passar para o restaurante. Tá bom?
Dá para ir a festa, né? Dois para. Inclusive é o lugar que vai ter a festa também. Ok? Bom, enquanto o Vitor arruma ali, eu vou dar um recadinho ao pessoal que vai apresentar os trabalhos no período da tarde. O professor Paulo Fabiosa, que é nosso chefe da parte relacionada aos trabalhos, né, da parte dos estudos, ele pediu para que vocês não esqueçam de colocar as apresentações de vocês no link que foi enviado, tá? Que na hora não vai dar para passar com o pendrive, sim, vai ter que fazer o upload lá na hora. É isso, Paulo? Mais um recado. Chama mais um recado, Rodrigo. Tudo bem, Vitor? Bom, gente, dando andamento aqui, então, na nossa programação, nós temos o prazer de estar com a Lara Niekerk. Ela é do Council for Scientific Research da África do Sul. Ela atua no Costeiras de Barra, é um grupo que tem como tema principal, né, estudar os usuários da África do Sul e propor ações de manejo baseado em ciência e outros conhecimentos associados, né, para que ocorra um manejo adequado daqueles ecossistemas da África do Sul. A Lara ela tem graduação ao nível de geografia, engenharia e engenharia civil. Ela tem doutorado em filosofia pela Universidade Nelson Mandela. A Lara tem cerca de 50 artigos científicos sobre o assunto, principalmente sobre usuários, mais de 100 relatórios técnicos científicos, e ela atua com outros grupos que também interagem aqui, como o grupo da Austrália, com essa relação com usuários. Tá? Então, Lara, seja bem-vinda. Welcome.
I thank you all for inviting me, especially the organizers. It's a great honor to talk to you today. And I really appreciate the opportunity to have a knowledge exchange and to learn from the very best people of Brazil. And it's also really, your problems is exactly the same as the problems we've got at the moment. Nothing different yet, even though it's completely different content. So, I think
I'm going to focus on my brief was to talk about the management of what we do since we are closed estuaries and lagoons. I'm using the word estuary interchangeable here. We see it as the big categories and lagoons fall under that, and I'll talk about it a bit. And I also thought I'll start with the overview of how we look at estuaries as a whole in the country and some of the tools that got very useful from our national processes and that we brought back into the local processes. So, I'm going to be very briefly, just I'm not necessarily hard sticking to my talk outline, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the estuaries of South Africa. And I'm firstly going to talk about the national biodiversity assessment, which is one of our big tools and understanding of the glaciers on our histories in South Africa, and the condition and how we use that information. Talk about our history management plan framework. So we require that for all histories in the country, and then go into history management plans and how we do that. And then finally, I'm talking about climate change a little bit, especially in the context of these big lagoon systems that we visited yesterday, and some of our findings looking at some of our systems and our concerns going forward. And then also, there's a lot here. Histories.
I welcome any interactions later. I will share my presentation. I will share some of this information with him. So if anybody is
interested afterwards to engage with this, it's a tool always with so much things in our presentation. So you're welcome to engage with some of the management processes we have, and I hope there's some fruitful discussions after this.
So firstly, we have 300 what we call SPIs in South Africa. They are all around the coast. We have our cold current coming down on the west coast, the Banguela current. We have a warm current on our east coast. And then we have the mix of the currents towards the bottom of the country. So we have everything in one country. So we have the cool temperate zones, which is arid, very little rainfall, large coastal plains. So we've got long estuaries down back into the coast, but many of the small ones will close for years on end and actually go hard to stay on. Then we have a warm temperate transition zone in the middle, and then moving on to our top of the east coast, a tropical going into tropics. So then the other thing you need to know about our systems is about 70% of these systems are very small. They are 50 hectares or less. So they're very, very small. We have 60% of our estuarine area captured in about 12 systems, with one system, Rocha, being the biggest estuarine lake or lagoon in the whole of Africa. It represents 50% of our estuarine area. And similar to the systems we visited yesterday, Rocha is full of conflicting management objectives and problems and diversions and canals. So it's very, very topical for us because we've modified it so much that we've actually worked ourselves into a corner trying to figure out what is best for this really big system. So again, I will end up my talk talking a little bit more about some of our concerns with the big systems. Then the other thing that I need to explain is that we've got we have quite a lot of legislation overlapping in South Africa's history. There's over 40 pieces of national legislation relevant to histories. We considered bringing out an history-specific act and then realized it will take implementation away from the sectors. So, like the Water Act, and people that work in that ministry deals with all things to do with flow and all things to do with water quality. And there is Coastal Management Act. Those deal with land use within the histories. And it's similar to you guys, we have a Living Marine Resources Act that looks at fisheries management.
And then we have also a Biodiversity Act, where many of the protected areas and protection targets and things like that.
If we were to bring out in one act for issues, we will not be giving the sectorial collaboration from the different other departments. So we decided to leave things as it is, and we brought out something called the National History Management Protocol, which requires all government departments to work together. and it forms the basis of a multi-role collaboration between the different sectors. The protocol also requires that for every issue, individual issue management plan be created, and I'll talk a little bit about the content a bit later, in which we make all the different sectors come to the party. But when we first did this, we discovered that, for argument's sake, the Department of Water Affairs didn't know necessarily that they were taking too much water from the estuary or putting too much. They thought the sewage discharge was up to standard. They didn't realize that this estuary was so close for so long that it was actually a problem. So we discovered a problem with management is that the managers didn't understand the consequences of their actions on the estuaries. Also, they were treating every estuary separately, so they didn't see the big picture of what was happening to estuary condition, diversity, processes. It was like a death of 1,000 cuts. You know, every estuary was treated separately and nobody stood back and saw the big picture. Everybody thought they were doing their best, which they weren't. So, in terms of that, and also to inform the local issue management programs, we have something in South Africa called the National Biodiversity Assessment. These documents are available online. This is our every 5 to 7 years. We collate on all the realms: land, sea, estuaries, rivers, wetlands, the condition, the state, the pressures, even the responses of government gets collated into a technical document, put together, streamlined as one voice. It's done by scientists in collaboration with managers to put out what we think the environment needs and how well we're managing the environment. It also feeds into our CBD reporting, so the Convention on Biodiversity is aligned with this document. And what we found after we did this, there was a lot of tools, management tools, that was very useful, that came from this process. It was very, very useful on the local level. I thought I should highlight some of these things because one thinks they're academic, but they are really, really important in issue management. So the first one of these was the delineation of estuary space. Councils like fighting about floodlines and management lines. Biologists often are happy to say the estuary is just the dot at the mouth. We all know where the river comes to the sea. That's where the estuary. In our head, when we did that, we knew the Berg River estuary was 70 km inland, but the managers didn't know that. So it was really important on hook or by crook to delineate the estuary space. Not just the mangroves, not just the salt marsh, not just where the salt stops. For us, our estuary space is as far back as the tide goes, or when the estuary is a closed system, often the water level rises more, and the estuary is actually bigger. The open water area goes further back. So either when the tide stops, salinity can't be measured anymore, or back flooding, whichever is the furthest, all estuarine habitats, freshwater, reeds, salt marsh, mangroves, all of that is included. We also bring in physical processes, the 1 in 100-year flood, which is beyond what I've just explained to you. It's in there if we have the information. We considered storms and floods, and we also considered climate change and sea level rise. So most of our estuaries will need another half a meter to meet accommodation space. And lucky for us, when our estuary flows, sea level 0, closed system around Cape Town 2.5 meters above, mean sea level. On the tropical coast, easy 3.5-4 meters. So for us, the closest they took it out was a 5-meter context. So we use that. So you're hearing me, so we use science in combination with a practical approach, we delineated the area. There was some resistance from developers in the beginning, but many of the provincial and local agencies were extremely grateful that for the first time in space, we could talk
where is the estuaries operating in. And now when new development applications come in, they're all measured against this line. So for us, it started off as a biodiversity construct, explaining to people in space, but you cannot enter management processes unless you actually done this. And the line does not have to be perfect to start off with. There is opportunities to refine, but if you don't put it out there and you don't make it big, if you're willing to tackle this fight, they're not gonna, don't just take the salt marshes. You're gonna fight this fight, you might as well fight it for the future as well. But this was an incredible tool for us. It also becomes the area we calculate a lot of our stats with, and we report international for ecosystems accounting and the sea approaches, all of that. Then the next one that was very useful, all people like typing or classifying. This is a pet that we all have, but it's not just academic. We don't have a lot of information on a lot of our systems. Typing allows you to extrapolate. It was worthwhile for us in South Africa to sit in a room and argue about the types. And in some cases, provisionally putting an estuary in a type. When we do flow requirements, we know small temporary open and closed systems will behave one way to pollutants, where a permanently open long system, the salinity will just increase. In a temporary open and closed system, the mouth will close. You know that. It's logical, but it's useful to have these types because you can extrapolate with a scientific basis. You can also explain to managers the responses. So our types is 9 types. And we have, in our case, we talk about lagoons. Then it has got no river into it. It's a groundwater fed system. We only have one. It's quite unique. We have estuarine lakes, which is like the ones we visited yesterday. Complex systems with multiple basins, with multiple rivers, with connecting channels, with difficult outflows, with long closed processes. These systems are in the class of permanently open systems, which is long, thin things with the river coming in. We have fluvially dominated systems, which is a lot of river water. They're normally muddy and shallow and very small salinity range in the mostly tidal and fresh. Big and small types. Temporary open and closed, which is generally smaller ones. And then estuarine base, which is an embayment with the river in it. We brought in a special arid type to reflect the estuaries in the desert that goes hypersaline, and then they will turn into the type of systems that will work through brine shrimp and flamingos. So these are our types, and I'm saying that it's a useful exercise. It's not just an academic exercise. We use this in flow requirement studies. We use it for water quality predictions, sensitivity to climate change. It's got multiple uses if your typing speaks to your physical processes. Then I'll run you quickly through the pressures. As part of the MBA process, also because we can't really trust our government to be to have the understanding of what different pressures will do to estuaries. We've looked at flow reduction. So from that perspective, for each estuary, we've looked at how much flow is being taken out and the impact of that. And overarching in South Africa, about a third of flow do not reach the coast anymore. It's in dams, with lots of consequences. We've reduced our flow from 36,000 to 24,800 million cubic meters. So we even have rough volumes and know where the impacts are, with about 20% of estuaries under severe flow reduction pressure. So that's because we're an arid country. In terms of pollution, the same process, we looked at every estuary. We know that 33% of estuaries are under severe pollution pressure. In our case, it's from sewage, agricultural runoff, and urban runoff. Those are the main things. There's about 840 million liters of sewage that run into South African estuaries daily. A lot of this is not treated. So you can imagine that's a severe impact on our systems, and we know which ones it is now. And we are driving, water quality is our biggest emerging concern. We ignored it, but it's becoming a real issue. And it's something we're really grappling with. Because if you can see the red square at the top there, on the Durban coastline, there's more than 100 kilometers of poor conditioned estuaries. They're basically dead systems. The oxygen levels are so low that instead of being able to find an open estuary every 5 kilometers, where the fish now has to move 100 kilometers upstream or downstream to get to the next waypoint. So we're driving changes in water quality at regional scales, which is the big concern. Then fishing pressure, huge. It's escalated in the last 10 years from about 3,000 tons to 3,700 tons. Problems with gill netting, going completely over the top. Nets has become really cheap these days. It used to be quite an expensive article. The Chinese is making it very easy for any African person to access very cheap nets. And this is putting about 20% of our systems under severe pressure. Nursery function severely compromising these systems. Land use change, a lot of it is in the past. From where we put the delineation line out in the last 10 years, we've actually slowed down the development a bit in the estuary functional zone, because now the provincial and even national people can track where the municipalities are approving development too quickly. And about 29% of estuaries are under severe land use change pressure in and around the coast, with less than 10% no pressures, and most of those are in protected areas. Our protected areas are working for that, but as you can see, it's a very small percentage. Mining is a big thing for us. It's a big emerging pressure. The approval for mining is not happening at provincial or local level. It happens at the national level. So similar to you, there's a lot of overriding concerns. Also, the problem with mining, some of it, like in that picture, is in the estuary functional zone, but some of it is right on the edge. But then the impacts of turbidity and runoff and water pollution, they still end up in the estuary, although technically the development isn't in the estuary. So mining is a big issue for us. Then artificial breaching, although only 15% of estuaries mouths is artificially open in South Africa. Remember I said 70%, 80% actually of our system closes. 15% is breached, but they are the big systems. Similar to you, it is the St. Lucia, the one that makes 50% of our area, and all these other big systems. So more than 60% of estuarine area in South Africa is impacted by artificial breaching, because these big systems are getting targeted. Big systems take longer to fill up. They don't fill up every 2-3 times a year. People seem to think they can manage these systems better, especially in drought cycles. People think that they can move into the floodplain, and then when the rains comes again, then there's all kinds of conflicts between humans and people in those floodplains. It's especially the big systems that we tend to breach. And then a new pressure that we've ignored up until now is biological invasions, and I can't say that we understand it very well. Basically, our information is on fish and plants, with quite a high number. We've got about 22 species of invasive fish, translocated fish in the estuaries. They were put there by our conservation agencies in the 50s, thinking that they're doing a good thing because they're making food for people. And now all those invasive species are actually eating our indigenous species. And then we also have about a third of estuaries with invasive plant species in them, especially aquatic invasives like hyacinth and other species that impact on oxygen and things in systems. Also, now I'm saying invasive plant species, I've just told you about our water quality problem. So it's a toxic combination, and then finally, if you know your type, this is a small temporary open and closed system, and you know your pressures, you can actually take, if you don't have information, a guess or a scientific estimate or a workshop to get to the condition of those systems. You can use your understanding of how a small system will react to a very high load of pollution, and you will not be that far off. We've done the work now. We do this as part of our flow requirement studies in South Africa, but we've now escalated the process to include all 300 estuaries. And what we've done is, using the combination of the pressure data and the types, we will put our systems in a condition category. And my blue colors here means the system we score out of 100. So if the estuary is in a good condition, gets a score of 100. Near natural would be 80. And then degraded system 60, 40 down the scale. And so what you can see at the top in the map is the blue systems are often quite small, and the brown dots, which is bigger systems, is in a poor condition. So we got an overview of our condition, and our managers were extremely shocked, because before we used to say, okay, 60% of South Africa's estuaries in good condition by numbers. But if you look on the East Coast, those are mostly small systems. And if you actually look at our good and the bigger systems, the picture turned around. And a very small percentage of our estuarine estate is actually still in good condition in South Africa. So it was better to report by area to make our managers and our government aware of the problems. And then more than 60% of our estuarine habitat is actually quite significantly transformed. So it's not a good news story. We then, and this is another tool, after we had the condition, everybody's aware of the threat status of species. So you can threat list a critically endangered turtle or a dolphin or whatever the case may be. The IUCN has brought out something in which you can do ecosystem types. A type here is all the permanently open estuaries in the cool temperate region. So functionally, that group will represent the same processes. And you can use the IUCN rate listing of ecosystems as a way of grouping different types of estuaries together to report on how those functional groups are actually doing. They allow us to do that. You can rate list mangroves, you can rate list salt marsh, but you can actually rate list the ecosystem type. In our country, there's lots of legislation for the rate listing of species. So we're going to try this approach to try and also get protection status to ecosystem types that is in very poor state. This helps with environmental impact assessments and also for the public. The public is very aware now of the fact that the ecosystem type is threatened, that this is the issue. So this is becoming another tool for us in terms of managing systems. And most of our estuary types is actually in one of the threatened categories. Also in the national assessment, estuary types were doing the worst of all the terrestrial types, ecosystem types, the marine ecosystem types. We had the most threatened types. This got our Minister of Environment for a brief period to pay attention to estuaries, because there was a very poor message that there's failure. And the failure is because the different sectors weren't necessarily working together, also just because there's so much pressure on the coast. Then finally, you can also use the types to look at conservation targets. So you can't just manage pressures. You also need to put, which is your management actions, you also need to look at conservation to try and maintain or restore some of the real functional processes. In South Africa, we used to work with 20%, but the CBD and even the IPCC is moving towards more stricter targets. So we're basically moving towards the 30% target for us as well, which means there's going to be a serious shortfall. And it's just a reporting framework. We will only count the estuary as counting towards a conservation target
if it's in a near natural or a good state still. It doesn't help you put a poor condition estuary in a conservation area and you say you're adding to your conservation target. So we're not doing that anymore. They used to do that. They used to do straight area targets. Now we take the ones out that is in poor condition. So well, that's a paper quota. It's not really working. So just on the NBA, then I'll move away from that. It's a really useful tool. This national assessment with the pressure data, the condition data, the whole way we put it together, doesn't just talk to national level management, it also talks to local. So when people do local issue management, we want them to take up our spreadsheets and our documents to go and look at your history. What is the water quality like? Is it good, fair, poor? What is the flow pressure? What is the fishing pressure? It informs local management as well. And it doesn't matter whether it's a temporary open and close or a permanently open system, all of them. This is the first step, to go to that national assessment and get a feel for the scientists' input as well into management processes. Because the concern is, often if you have a stakeholder process just driven by locals, many of the things like water quality will never even enter the discussion until it's really a problem. Locals will only bring up water quality of their fish kill or a really smelly issue. By then, the ecosystem is in a tipping point. As a scientist, we know long before the locals do that there's a problem here, but there's no ways to influence the dialogue. The National Biodiversity Assessment becomes a proactive tool where people can go and look up, and when they have local meetings, they can see the scientists already said this one is in a medium condition for water quality. So it doesn't matter if the local fisherman doesn't bring it up. We're telling you there's a problem and you're going to have to do something about it, which means the Department of Water Affairs needs to be at the meeting. They have to be responsible for the fact that that needs managing. So it's really important for prioritization, but also we have concerns. Our biological data sets are more than 30 years old in some systems. So my message is, when you do this type of work, it doesn't have to be perfect the first time. We've done the biodiversity assessment 3 times, and still these things that's not perfect, and still we need to go and collect data. But for management, you don't need a perfect data set. In fact, management needs to know good, fair work. Scientists will argue about 5% difference in condition, because that's what we are, to the third decimal. But actually, you just, management, to prioritize, just need to know this is a really good condition system, we want to protect it. It's a really poor condition system. Is it worth putting the resources into restoring it, or this is a moderate condition system, we have to stop it applying further? That's how broad management is. So don't let the lack of data, because you like us, we don't have 300 years of data like they have in Europe. We have our scientific understanding and extrapolation between systems to help us. And then the odd national data set that will help us. Then on the National Issue Management Protocol, I should touch on this because this is, sorry, there's a figure in there that shouldn't be in there. Just look at the white bit. The protocol basically starts with the situation assessment, this is common management cycle. There's nothing new about the protocol. It was just us forcing the sectors to engage in this. It starts with a situation assessment, but the situation assessment looks at the estuary condition, the estuary desired state, important biology, the different cultural groups, the different uses, the economics of the area. It sort of gives you an overview of the system. Then we go into a process of setting a vision, putting the outline of the estuary in there, highlighting some of the management actions that's already happening here. So this is where the protocol really works. The Department of Fisheries, the Department of Water Affairs, the Department of Coastal Management
all have to come to the table and tell the community what they're already doing, what is already their mandate. They're probably not doing it, but they're supposed to do it. And to have a dialogue with the local community. As part of that, we will also have representative groups. So it will not be all the fishers in the area, but the fishing community will have 1 or 2 representatives sitting on that meeting. It will be tourism, it could be cultural, economics, whatever the groups can organize themselves. What we did find in the first round is that we weren't making an authority in charge of the process. But then it just became a talk shop. If you don't have people with executive powers taking the lead, there is no money, there is no mandate, there is nothing happening. So it became central that the government officials from the different sectors actually take the lead, and the local people and the local municipality try and sort of like through dialogue act as an advisory forum. Because if it's just when a local person was leading it, like an activist, they really couldn't get government to do what they needed to do. It needed to be in your mandate. We also, as part of the protocol, try to unify our monitoring processes, the little bit that happens. So if you do water quality, you collect water quality for everybody, not just for your specific study, so that you can share your results. Or if you do fisheries management, you collect data on all the fish, not just the species that's important to the fishermen. And then you also need to state your institutional capacity. You might have a wish list that's 3 pages long of what you want to do, but you only have money for the top 3 activities over the next 3 years. We will leave all the activities there, but you have to be honest and say, my government department only have funding, or I'm only going to get to this in 2 years' time on my budget. So you cannot commit to everything if the funding is not there, or if it's a really important issue, then we have to go back to national government and try and find funding for that activity. But it's important to link up the wish list with the funding resources. And then finally, this is a 5-year cycle of implementation in which we will see how well the actions or projects are getting implemented, but they're actually also supposed to monitor the ecology, not just the actions. Then underneath that, so we have this normal management cycle of setting the vision and the actions and things started happening. But then at some systems, artificial breaching becomes one of the big issues. So then we have what we call the issue management plan. This is a proactive tool in which you look or investigate whether you're going to breach the issue. So not everywhere people ask you to breach, do you actually need to breach? So the first question is actually, should you be breaching this issue? Then after that, it gives us a description of the issues. You pick this document up, it tells you all about the health, the state, what's important in it. Who's the relevant authority? So it's the local municipality, the conservation agency, the Department of Fisheries. It tells us why we want to breach this issue, flooding, whichever is the case. The breaching, how it should be done, what time of the year, where, all of that information, what type of equipment. And then finally, it needs to be adaptive management. We've had issues which got stuck in the same breaching pattern for 20 years with nobody going back and checking if it actually makes sense what was happening there. So as part of that, it's really important after every breaching that a short report, it could be 5 pages, but just some of the key observations of the breaching being recorded, report back to the forum once a year, and then we can go back and check, are we actually doing what we want to do? When we breached on this side, didn't it actually close a little bit earlier than normal? Or we lost the parking lot, or whatever the case may be. But the reporting is quite important. What we're also finding these days, even better than reporting, drone footage. Beautiful for showing the processes and discussing and making people see the same thing. So we started to take pictures of drone footage of most breaching so we can also see what works. And then this is a bit contentious because it's just had litigation. In most cases in the past, it was the municipalities with an advisory forum. Then we had a lawsuit, and at the moment, a lot of it is the federal government, the provincial government that's doing it. So the municipalities doesn't like that because the federal government takes its time. They don't breach as quickly. They're querying more whether we should be breaching or not. So the local municipalities get very antsy about it. So they're probably going to go back to doing it. And then in South Africa, reasons for breaching. Low-lying developments, approved ones. Water quality, algae blooms, fish kills. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. Poorly planned bridges and access roads, where people have, like they can't get to their areas. Public health, septic tank storage, same story as you guys had yesterday. Flow reduction, we've had dam developments taking water and then the estuaries remain closed for so much longer and then the berm builds up so much higher, becoming a flood risk. And then drowning of mangroves. I think my most ridiculous reason for breaching is a nudist beach. They have a nudist beach on one of the estuaries, and when the water level rises, they can't go there to do whatever they need to do. So they approach the municipality for a breaching permit. And then this type of problem, how can you solve it? Artificial breaching is often seen by municipalities as the cheapest solution. You can dredge. You can do a flow release if there's a dam to try and keep the system open. Or you can try canalize the mouth, which is the other example that was there yesterday. In many cases, that doesn't really work if you have a high sediment load and a poor tidal exchange. So I think the jury is out, and where the engineering structure we saw on the field trip is going to last in the long term. But that is basically the same reason, the motivations in South Africa, so it's the same as you. Then we've developed a set of principles because you sometimes do in breaching meetings have to think on the fly. So we developed a set of principles that you have to think about when you breach. And the first one for us is natural is best. You need to know that estuary's natural cycle. Does it open in winter? Does it open in spring? What is its normal processes? How long does it stay open? If it only stays open for 3 weeks normally, then there's no reason to think it's going to stay open for 6 weeks all of a sudden or 8 weeks. Water levels as high as possible. The higher the water level, the better the scouring power. When the water flows through the mouth, the more sediment it takes out, the longer the estuary stays open. People are going to fight with you about this, but this is an absolute fact. There's no argument about the physics here. Higher water levels, more scouring, more sediment, estuary stays open longer, less sediment in the back channels, estuary doesn't shallow up. If you reach at lower levels, you will cause more marine sediment to come in. Your estuary will become shallow, and over long periods, 50 to 100 years, it will take more effort to breach it, and it will not stay open in the end. So those are givens. In our case, we have a high energy coastline. We try not to breach in winter because we have more coastal storms in winter. So more sediment comes in winter. We try for spring. Spring also works for biological processes. Then we tend to breach on springs because you want the biggest drop. I heard the same thing here. Biggest drop on a spring tide. So we also do a high tide, spring tide, so biggest drop during the breaching process to the low tide. It was an interesting discussion for me on the full moon, dark moon, because in South Africa, we don't really worry too much about we'll pick any spring tide, but some species actually migrate on the dark moon because the channel is shallow. And it's better for them to go on the dark moon. So we literally have inverts that we know more of them will go in on the dark moon than on the full moon. So that was just something, but we don't, that's like a secondary consideration for us. Then we have, okay, I did already say high tide. We have people surfing standing waves in big systems. So where we can, we try and bridge during the night or very early. So the maximum outflow happens in the dark. So when people hear about it, it's already not there. Because it can be a really big safety concern. People don't understand standing waves, the type of waves that develop in a breaching. And in these big systems, it's really powerful forces. And dogs fall in and little children fall in. It's a horrendous situation. But we've also had problems where we've done this quite successful. It costs more, but there's water birds that don't fly at night. So when the maximum outflows during the night, you can end up drowning a lot of water birds because they don't fly at night. So you have to work with your ecology on that rule. We make the deepest channel possible. Because you've lost a meter or 2 meters of water, we will try and dig 2 meters down. So your entrance channel will leave a plug and then go down as deep as we possibly can to mimic the natural scouring forces. I understand that when this big system starts, they carry on their own, but you have actually lost maybe a meter of scouring water on a really big system. And then appropriate location, we try and match up with old channels to reduce friction. We try to look at nursery function recruitment, the blooms of salt marshes, all of those are considered. Estuary connectivity, we have some systems where every 10 years we know genetic exchange needs to happen. So if one is open, we might actually open the other one at the same time if it's full, so that we can allow the animals to move from the one estuary to the other. And then on water quality, if you breach for water quality purposes, sometimes you put the good water out to sea. You're actually making it worse. Your bottom is full of organics, higher oxygen demand. Now where the water column was 2 meters deep, now it's only 1 meter deep, and you've actually made it worse for the fish that's in the back. You might have flushed everything out in the front, but in the back of the system, you've actually made it worse. Water quality actually needs to be fixed at source. Breaching for water quality purposes is not really a solution. You're fooling yourself if you're thinking it's helping. And then we have also now we've got a very, I'm not saying we're beating this, but we're trying to do a very hard push on that because it's not really working. It's actually just stressing the system. Then also we have some systems where breaching help with alien invasives, like we've got a harmful algae bloom, a golden algae in some of our systems. And under brackish condition, it fluorescent neurotoxins, really bad for the fish. If we can breach and water level is there, the extra salt helps to control the aliens. So there's a few systems where salt water can actually help to control things like that. So those are our principles that we consider. And then, of course, you can't prevent flooding. People think because a system is artificially breached, you can manage floods. You can't. A 1 in a 20-year flood, a 1 in a 50-year flood, there's no ways you can prevent flooding if people have developed in a floodplain. That is what a floodplain is. That's where the floods go. It's a given. And it's a fallacy that people believe artificial breaching can actually prevent loss of human life if you go and establish yourself in a floodplain. And that's also the measures we're trying to see with the issue functionals. And you can try and protect people and property. But like I said, if you breach too much at too low levels, you actually cause saltation in the mouth. The entrance channel is making more frictions. The water levels take longer to go down, actually. If you put more sediment in the entrance channel over a longer distance, it actually takes longer for the flood to take all that sediment and drop the water level. So in fact, you increase your risk of flooding in the long term, even though you're trying to do a good thing. So I thought I'll take you quickly through another case study of ours. I think I can't see the time, so I don't actually know how far I am.
But on Groot Brak, this is a 150 hectare estuary. The red line is the 5-meter contour. This thing has been breached since the 1800s with British troops going through the mouth. It's extensive development below in the floodplain. There's a dam on the system that's increased mouth closure. It used to be 80% open, it's now only about 20% open. Huge buildup of sediment in front. We do have water sometimes from the dam to help with releases, but it's still a major flood risk in this town. And people are always clamoring for breaching. They want to breach every single day. This is their thing. And so this is what Groot Brak looks during a flood. I think that was a 1 in 10 or 15. It happens actually quite a lot in this system. Access Road. This was a 1 in 20-year flood in 2007. They tried. They opened the mouth in time before the time, but there was no stopping what was coming through here. And then, okay, this is more of what it looked like during the flood. And then, for the first time, climate change. In the same 12-month period, we had a wave overtopping event. So these people are always clamoring for an open mouth and want to reduce the risk of flood. In this case, in less than, like I said, within 12 months, we had a massive overtopping event of the berm. And lucky for this community, the mouth was actually closed when this happened. And the berm actually protected them from the extreme waves what was out on the outside. And this is a water level recorder of those events. And what you can see is where the squiggly lines is the black is where the system is open, and where the straight line is where the system is closed. The sea event was higher than the 1 in 20-year event. In fact, in this estuary now, the 5 highest levels on record since the 1980s, with the 1980 when the recorder went in, so we've got 50 years of data. The 5 highest events, 2 of them are from the beach now and not from the river. So breaching isn't always best. Understand what your berm does in terms of protection as well. It's not a given that an open mouth is a good thing. Given all what is happening out there, and in this context, we really had to work with this community to understand it. And also the fact that you cannot take the risk away. Then I just thought, I'm not going to go into detail in here, but we also use flow requirement studies as a way of trying to understand, if you take water away, are you going to increase the closed mouth conditions? And when you write breaching plans, you have to consider that as well. Sometimes hands going to be forced to breach an issue because you've got taken so much water away that you need to re-establish connectivity with the marine environment again. So it's not always a case of saying no to breaching. Sometimes breaching can compensate, but like I said, it causes sedimentation, it causes other problems. So it's not a tool you must use just because. And in our flow requirement studies, we take an ecosystems-based approach. We look at the historical flows to see when was the high flows and the low flows, and how high was the high flows. We then look at the hydrodynamics, the water quality, and the sediment processes. And then finally, we ripple that through the biological processes. Every estuary has got its unique pattern of open mouth conditions and how it's responding. You need to know that. Your management decisions can't be because the next door one is managed like this, we're going to manage this one. And this process we do in the flow requirement studies, it also ties up the whole water thing. So back to all the pressures. When you manage a breaching situation, you need to understand all the pressures on that system. Otherwise, the law of unintended consequences will kick in and catch you out. We also look at ecosystem services and how they will respond to changes in flow. And then again, that same data will be used in the National Biodiversity Assessment, the management plans, the mouth management plans, the conservation plans. the IUCN red listing of ecosystems. We don't have the resources. If you go to Europe, they have a different index for everything they do. They have a different assessment approach for everything they do. They have the luxury of very different ways. If they do flows, they do it one way. If they do fisheries, they do it another way. And if they do conservation planning, they have another measure. We don't have that. We have one index, one type of scale for health, and we try and use the same communication tool for all the different departments. So that was just that. And then finally, last 3 slides, I promise, on climate change, especially this type of system. We did a sort of a review, a study on it. In South Africa, we're going to look at a warmer and a drier climate. Our temperatures are going up 2 to 4 degrees, 6 degrees in some months. We will see wetter summers in the warm temperate, so the tropical, subtropical areas is getting wetter. And then we're going drier on the east coast. We're going to see more floods and we're going to see more droughts. That is our future. We did an evaluation of our larger lake systems. So in this graph, the top, the blue colors is good condition, 100%. The bottom, the brown colors is degraded. And we scored the RPC, so representative carbon pathway, 4.5, which is if people stop producing so much carbon, and 8.5. In the near future, potentially, the systems might even look a little bit better because we're putting a bit more water in and compensating for some of the flows that's gone away. But in general, our systems will decline in conditions somewhere between 10 and 20%. And in all cases, these systems will be the worst case under where the trajectory is going for carbon concentrations in the future. So the bottom of the dots here is actually our future. But what we did find is these systems are somewhat buffered. We thought the responses would be more extreme, but because the lakes are closed for long times, or the lagoons are closed for long times, they're not that sensitive. But, oh, sorry, there's something here. I'm missing one of my slides. I don't know why. Okay, I'll just talk you through that. Ignore that, because that's not the picture that's supposed to be there. What we found was, when we disaggregated anthropogenic impacts from the climate impacts, in all cases, anthropogenic impacts were worse than the climate impacts. We've done more than what the future climate is going to do to the systems. But systems that was nutriently enriched was incredibly sensitive to future warmer conditions. You'll see more algae blooms, you'll see herps developing, fish kills, low oxygen water. So estuarine lagoons, these big systems that's enriched, are incredibly vulnerable to climate change moving forward. The systems that was near natural, that could deal with this. And then finally, the shallow systems, which is also like yours, becomes very sensitive to drying out. And that holds a risk moving forward in the future, that you will have a dried out system. And then what happened in our case, so our climate change messages here to managers was that these systems are a continuum. Every one of them are unique, and they're going to respond slightly differently to climate change. But systems that is, and these systems are also very complex. That was the other thing we discovered, that we should embrace this complexity. People try to smooth out these difficult cycles these lake systems go through. We don't like change. We don't like that every 20 years these systems do something they've never done before. But this is what these lake systems do. And they're actually, these stresses is what's forming this rich endemism and the evolutionary processes that are happening in these systems. And us not allowing the water levels to go up, or the salinities to go up, or the salinities to be very fresh for a long time while the system fills up. We are taking, for me it feels like we're taking the incubators that's going to give resilience to climate change in the future. We're taking that away because we're trying to keep these systems in a starting, like a condition for us. And that's a message people need to understand by the lake systems. They don't behave like the smaller systems. They have long decadal cycles, more than our lifetimes. And even though they're very large, they're very vulnerable to pollution, to flow reduction, even to overfishing. Don't think because they're large, they're not sensitive. They have memories, and we can't flush them. Once we put the pollutants in them, the floods can't really clean them out like they do with a little system. By the time the fish kills happens, it's too late. The time to do something about them is now, not when the signs are there for everybody, not when your local community becomes concerned. We have to make the managers aware of the problems before the time, because once it's so visible to the untrained eye, you must know we're at a tipping point. We're like at ecosystems collapse. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. Water quality is a very good predictor of future resilience to climate change. Polluted systems have very little resilience. And also then my final message to us was, don't be arrogant, expect change. This is a Ramsar site. We went in 2000 and we knew the system was in a drought, but we didn't expect this. Dried out, when we went, the pH was 3. And what happened is your organic rich sediments, basically, that's the pH. We had 20 years of data. We know the system has never done this before. And during the drought, the rich peatlands and organic soils dried out, and the pyrite basically, you get pyrite dissolution, and it turns into iron and to hydrochloric acid. And when the first rains come, it washed all that salt into the system, and it ended up with a pH similar to vinegar and lemon juice. And that's what the system looks like at the moment, and it's been like that now for 2 years. And it's a lake system, like your big ones. And this is mismanagement. It's a natural drought. It would have gone into a drought for a year, but because of abstraction, the anthropogenic impact compounded with the natural drought, is that the system was dried out for 5 years. And in the process, the soils changed. We didn't expect this, and we've never experienced this. And now we also don't have a management plan to fix this. The only way to fix it is to put the water back. Oh, sorry. So sorry. I think my slide shifted a bit between different platforms here. That's the end of my talk. I just wanted to highlight some of the management approaches we have, and some of our key messages and the things that we are grappling and engaging with. And also to say that I think science, our job is to advocate for these systems. I believe that you do need the big picture. Like yesterday, one of my take-home messages was, I thought, if you just listen to your communities, they're always going to ask for an open mouth. Like that's the one thing. Every single community I know in South Africa wants an open mouth. The net result of that is that you will have no brackish water left if you listen. You do need to see the big picture. If you're going to open every single estuary and you're going to allow that amount of marine water into your freshwater lagoons, you're going to be changing habitat at a big scale. So I think the lesson for us was that the national assessment, there is systems where we've done this, obviously, but we know what we're losing. So that you're going forward, you don't do it one by one, that you have the big picture and that you can think, I'm going to allow it in this system, but in this system, we do need a brackish environment. We do need to accommodate these species as well. We do need to accommodate this process versus just, so my fear, or literally, if we don't put the science and the understanding of the natural processes in the management cycles, and we just accommodate the demand of the local communities, we will be changing all our systems in one direction and not have this diversity in the landscape. So I can't solve your problem, but I can warn you that it's important to have the balance and to understand the historical processes and the scale at which humans are changing processes. Thank you. And I'm sorry if I ran over my time. I didn't bring my watch.
Thank you, Lara. It was amazing, very illustrative and clear presentation. Thank you so much. And now we will open to questions.
Yes.
Okay. Pessoal, perguntas? 3, 4 segundos? Temos aí 3 oportunidades de 3, 4 perguntas.
Só tem pessoal saindo, sobraram ainda alguns kits. Então, se quem quiser pegar algum kit que sobrou de quem não veio, vai ser disponibilização.
Rodrigo, quem para nós depois?
Okay, now the questions.
That's one.
Na verdade, não é muito uma pergunta, né? Não é pergunta porque ela não deixou dúvida no que ela falou. Mas primeiro, assim, uma constatação, né? Eu estou aqui, assim, muito feliz em escutá-lo, porque quantas vezes a gente foi chamado de maluco, como comunidade, em querer fazer um comitê de abertura de barra, exatamente para não ser só uma voz falando o que achava, com seus interesses únicos, né? E usando exatamente essa desculpa, vamos abrir a barra para limpar a água da lagoa, né? Enquanto os nossos pescadores locais, que aí é só uma questão de uma observação para contribuir na fala dela, quando ela fala, a gente não deve só ouvir os locais. Exatamente. Mas aí eu faço uma emenda nessa fala. A gente não deve só ouvir os locais com os interesses particulares. Que é isso que aconteceu na nossa barra. A nossa barra estava sendo aberta tantas vezes no ano, enquanto sempre foi respeitada pelo olhar dos pescadores e mestres de pescas artesanais, que disseram, a nossa barra vai morrer, a nossa lagoa vai morrer, está sofrendo interferência absurda das águas salgadas a todo tempo. Está deixando de ser água salobra, está mudando a qualidade do peixe, está mudando a qualidade do camarão, a criação dos crustáceos, e isso que dizia o nosso mestre Anastácio. E se começarem desse jeito, vão acabar com muitas espécies dentro da lagoa, porque ela está sendo aberta só com visão no turismo. A barra as fossas começaram a encher, por exemplo, da barra. Fizeram as casas tudo na beirada, da onde é a cheia da lagoa. Obviamente, a lagoa enche, as fossas não funcionam mais. Bom, isso é um problema sanitário. Isso é um problema de saneamento. Não é questão que tem que abrir as nossas lagoas para ter fossas abrindo, para ter as fossas escoando. Água tudo para o mar, então. Bom, aí joga o dejeto todo para o mar e tudo bem. Só que não, porque isso não estava se contando com a saúde do pescado, com a saúde da nossa lagoa. Foi aonde de tanta comunidade pedir para que a gente faça algo nesse sentido, que não deixem o pessoal, né, com os empreendimentos políticos e as questões imobiliárias mandarem na abertura da barra. Antes do comitê, pessoal, Eu quero fazer esse relato, assim, para todos os gestores públicos que não queriam nos escutar. E agora alguns políticos que já estão questionando o Comitê de Abertura da Barra, que tem os seus interesses e não querem escutar a verdade que é a saúde daquela lagoa. Por nós que moramos e conhecemos, pelos mestres de pesca, e pelos gestores que se preocupam ambientalmente também, eles também estão sendo questionados. Está aí o Ronaldo presente, que sabe o que foi. A gestão da abertura da barra, quando ele disse, não, era lá, não é assim. Tem uma sabedoria aqui que tem que ser respeitada. Ah, não, mas a estrada está cheia de buraco com a água da lagoa. Ah, não, mas a minha fossa não está passando mais. Oi! Só que não, né? Vamos respeitar a saúde do pescado, a saúde da lagoa. Então, assim, eu vejo hoje quanto nós estamos acertando nos critérios da abertura da barra, vendo que a gente só muda de endereço, né? É tudo a mesma coisa. A gente não é perfeito e a gente nunca vai, e ela falou isso na fala dela, a gente nunca vai ser perfeito, né? Em todos os critérios. Por quê? Porque é dinâmico. Eu vejo pessoas dizendo, ah, mas está tendo assoreamento com a maré. Cara, sempre foi assim. Muda e volta. O monitoramento vai mostrar isso. É importante o monitoramento para mostrar o quanto uma abertura de barra ela é dinâmica, o quanto ela muda, o quanto a natureza hoje é aqui, amanhã ela está lá, ela abre aqui, amanhã ela estoura lá. E é isso. Então, se a gente vai fazer uma interferência de abertura mecânica, a gente tem que, pelo menos, considerar o que a natureza já está avisando. Se a natureza já está avisando, se ela já está avisando, por que a gente vai desrespeitar? Então, aí se une o saber local, o saber acadêmico, com o saber da mãe natureza. E quem não escuta a mãe natureza está ralado em todas as suas ações aqui nesse planeta. Né? Então, os critérios, eles têm... Nossa, o que ela falou? A água tem que estar cheia, a lagoa tem que estar cheia para fazer o canal, para entrar, para sair, para escoar e depois entrar, né? As ressacas. As ressacas levaram quase restaurantes para dentro da barra agora. Porque eles não contaram, eles quiseram abrir perto do canal, perto de onde não era para abrir, perto dos restaurantes, porque ficava o canal mais fundo, o pessoal tomando banho. Ressaca entrou e quase levou estrada, quase levou restaurante, e agora a gente pagou caro para fazer o erro, ver o erro que eles cometeram de ter aberto esse lugar errado. Então, assim, a gente sabe que o quanto mais a gente considera democrático esse espaço de comitê, o quanto é importante, porque hoje tem várias vozes, muitas coisas mudaram, então tem a voz da prefeitura, tem a comunidade, tem a gestão da água. Agora é preciso sim que um órgão sério, que não tenha interesses particulares, que não tenha influências de politicagens por trás, fique com a coordenação dessa abertura, sabe? E isso cada vez para mim está mais claro. Quando a DET chamou a primeira vez para se fazer como gestora da Maria Elizabeth da Rocha, agradecer muito a DET por ela ter escutado a comunidade. É preciso que se faça um comitê de abertura de barra, para que todo mundo participe junto, para que todo mundo pense junto. Não só uma cabeça, todo mundo pensando junto, construir o melhor. Né? Agora, há questionamentos dizendo, mas que comitê é esse? Que negócio é esse? Claro, pegou nos seus interesses, aí eles começam a questionar. Se está perfeito este comitê, talvez não, ele tenha de se aperfeiçoar muito mais. Eu acho. A gente tem que estar sempre se aperfeiçoando. Agora, destruir o que já está sendo feito para só a minha verdade valer, isso não é construção. Isso não é construção. Então, é desse ponto que nós, como comitê da abertura da barra, queremos ser ouvidos. Nós que se preocupamos com a questão ambiental, com a questão local, com a questão de um ciclo da nossa lagoa, que se preocupa com esse todo ciclo, para a gente construir o melhor agora para frente do comitê, que ele já tem. Mas eles foram usando os critérios exatamente como ela leu lá. Os critérios das nossas barras são exatamente considerados tudo o que ela falou. Claro que a gente pode aprimorar muito mais. E a gente sabe que perfeito a gente nunca vai chegar. Então, assim, foi para mim, sabe que às vezes parece que sai um peso das tuas costas, de tanto ser escorraçado e as crianças perguntam, ai, mas o cheiro da lagoa está insuportável, é lama orgânica, nossa lagoa tem esse cheiro naturalmente, sentem esse cheiro da natureza, piorou muito mais com a poluição, com todos os dejetos indo para dentro da lagoa de qualquer jeito, óbvio, com as fossas dentro da lagoa praticamente, óbvio, com a drenagem dos canais das nossas estradas indo diretaço para dentro da nossa lagoa, que nem se ela fosse um grande poção, né, do saneamento que a gente não tem, óbvio que piorou o cheiro da lama, mas é isso, a gente tem que considerar todo o nosso, e considerem as coisas que a gente fala como comunidade, e parece que a gente está falando um bicho de sete cabeças grego, não respeito o olhar do mestre como o senhor Anastácio, que morou dentro daquela lagoa, dizendo que se não tiver um canal fundo, aquelas galinhas lá vai aumentar muito mais e tudo isso. Então, assim, ai, desculpa, mas é meio que um desabafo mesmo, sabe? Escutem, considerem. E a criação coletiva, só o Emerson sabe o que a gente passou dentro desse comitê, escutando barbaridades, ele como técnico sério da prefeitura e a gente como comunidade, que a gente escutou de políticos que estavam por trás de interesses para abrir porque estava poluída a lagoa. Ora, meu Deus do céu, querem fazer a fossa dentro da lagoa e não querem depois um retorno disso? Só assim, é um desabafo mesmo, sabe? Mas eu acho que a gente está no caminho certo. E esse evento agora vai fazer a gente melhorar muito mais.
Obrigado.
Viva a APA da Baleia Franca! Viva a APA!
I just want to say thank you. And I do agree. It is very nice for me to see that we independently more or less arrived at the same principles. And the principles in many cases has helped when we came to crossroads and to diffuse situations. So they're actually a powerful tool in dialogue as well to remind people, because most people in the end are willing to admit that they want the best for Lagoon. They just don't always agree on the route to get there. So, but I thank you and I wish you luck. And for us as well, it has to be by committee. There has to be a platform and there also has to be some accountability. And also to be willing to change if things don't work. So it's important to monitor, to make the investment. I would argue for water quality and oxygen, the hidden danger here. Regularly to monitor that with water levels and things, and to use the feedback processes to make sure that you're on the right track. Learn from us, don't leave a big system 20 years in the same breaching pattern, because that's also dangerous. Thank you.
Eu gostaria de saber quais as estratégias utilizadas para conciliar os diversos interesses, né, na criação desses critérios de abertura de barcos e se eles realmente são obedecidos. E também se os órgãos ambientais da África, eles levam em consideração esse riquíssimo conhecimento que essas comunidades tradicionais têm para se criar esses critérios.
Okay, so because estuaries are so threatened, so the biodiversity is very threatened. We've taken a hard stance that we will try and put our estuaries as close as possible to the historical natural patterns. I'm not saying we always get there, but that would be the trumping factor for us. So if a group asks for a breaching to facilitate occupant site fishing here, and it's not the natural pattern, they might be, it will become a secondary criteria. It will not become the main criteria. But your hands are curtailed where there's legal low-lying developments. So then flooding will force the issue. So we'll try and make the pattern as much as possible to natural. Communities change. It is really hard in the dialogue to distinguish between vested interests and knowledge. And I'm not just looking into indigenous knowledge, all knowledge. In many cases, we don't have indigenous knowledge, like there's nothing, there's no records going back 200 years ago how the system worked. It's just people living there telling us what they think they saw when they were small. You have to combine that. People will tell you this issue always opened in winter, but if you go and look at the rainfall records, you can see it didn't open every winter. There was never enough rain for it to have opened when people tell you that. That's how they remember it. I'm not saying people lie, or coastal communities will tell you the issue is always open, but they come in the holiday season. For the last 40 years, they've come for 2 weeks to a coastal town. That is their perception based on a snapshot in town, always the same time. So when you talk to people and they tell you things, you have to contextualize their observations in the context of how they interact with the system. But in the back, you do need to look at some of the hard sciences, because so you have to combine. You have to combine your physical understanding with what your local people's observations is. And also what we find in the committee, sometimes one voice, one person can be extremely articulate and very forceful and can end up swaying interactions. You can have one person, it could be a rich developer, or it could be very well spoken, or it could be a priest, or it could be a rich farmer, but he's a community leader and he's got an opinion, and his opinion then becomes the opinion and he overshadows a lot of the other voices. So there's a lot of other things you need to consider as well in these committees. But mostly for us, the blueprint is going back to trying to understand the historical ecology, because we've lost so much estuarine processes that we're trying our very best to keep as close as possible to natural. And then you also sometimes, like on location is another one, we always fight about where to open the mouths. Literally, adaptive management is the best. You breach it, it's not staying open. You breach it here, it does a bit better. You breach it there, maybe it goes too close, whatever the case may be. So you actually need to, it's like the polluter pays principle. If you're going to fiddle with them, you should be willing to put the money in to monitor, to see what your fiddling is doing. Also, sometimes we as scientists think what people are recommending is not going to work, but the point is they might actually have a point. So sometimes you have to do a breaching also to bring the community along. Like I can see up front this is too low or it's in the wrong position, but sometimes we have late breachings happen where people wanted them to happen, to show to people, but see, this is why we said. So it's not good for the environment, that breaching, but it's sometimes good to take people along. Also, where we've raised water levels, it's a process. You don't, in the olden days, people opened lagoons with spades, and it took 2 days to open them. So the warning trigger levels on the ruler is very low because they were very worried they're going to get flooded out. Now you do it with a front end loader or a bulldozer. It's fast, 2 hours, 3 hours. You can put the equipment on standby. You can let the water level go up, but then the community get very scared. So we won't do that all. We might say we think we can go up 0.5 meter, and we will do that over 3 or 4 or 5 breachings, and every time go up by 10 centimeters and see and bring the community along with us, but also learn. We might not have known that septic tanks are going to give a problem. So it might look like it's going to be fine 0.5 meter, but actually it's only 20 centimeters. So those are processes, and it is important to consider the human dimensions, because as a scientist, I sometimes want to move forward too quickly for the environment, and that's not always the fastest route. I've had to learn that. And so it is true what the lady was saying, that you actually need a neutral authority in charge, because sometimes that person has to moderate between the scientist that wants to do the right thing, the community that's got another thing. There's also legal obligations involved here, and the Biodiversity Act. Like for us, this will fall under some of the things we will report it to the CBD in the end, because many of our systems that's poorly managed, breaching is part of it, and like I said, that's a big part of our estate, is drawing areas actually under breaching. So it is one of the breaches that's actually quite serious, and to try and manage it. So we try, our principles is being informal, and we're in the process of elevating it to a national guideline, like formalizing it more and working it. And also then, there's always emergencies. So it's nice, you can dialogue things away and make the best plans in the universe, but when that big flood comes, it's like you had we have disaster risk, then it just goes. Then all the nice science plans, to be honest, falls by the window, but also normally a big flood is in any case a resetting event for the history. So with a big flood, there's a lot of things that happens. There's bad things for the community. It's very good things for history generally when a big flood comes through, taking all the organics and things out. Yeah, so it is exactly what you said. It's a process. It's a process of negotiation. It's a process of putting the science in there so the community can hear it, and it's a process to keep on refining. But the spiral must go up, not down. You can't just keep on giving in and giving in and giving in, and more houses and more storage. If you're going to allow more houses, then the houses must be raised. The septic tanks can't be septic tanks. They have to be reticulated systems. If you can't keep on with the same, if your planning guidelines is giving you problems, then you have to increase the tools. So we're doing that now. A lot of our septic tanks are going onto reticulation systems, and in some cases it's outhouses or toilets, and people have actually been told you will now raise that structure. Literally your toilet is one of the reasons why we have to bridge the system X meters lower, or 20 centimeters or 30 centimeters. There's even been NGOs that assisted homeowners if single properties are the problem. We have another one. Councils often put parking lots and public toilets very low lying. So we've had to go back to the councils and told them to remove their toilets or put them on reticulation or raise the platform. But it's not right that councils or even conservation agencies be the first properties to be inundated, and when they're also the custodian of the environment. So there's been some hard discussions around councils having to lead by example. Thank you. I'm sure I'm well over my time. I thank you very much for the opportunity.
Lara, just a second. We have a small gift for you. Bom, pessoal, agora só um recadinho. A palestra do Rodrigo vai ficar para o início da tarde, tá? Então, estamos aí dispensados para almoço. A palestra vai ser às 2h da tarde, tá? Então, almocem e voltem correndo.
Jorge, só uma parte que ainda eu agora lembrei de dizer uma coisa, é que não há uma receita perfeita, né, para a abertura de Barra. Agora, essa questão de ter um espaço democrático para todo mundo conversar, falar, isso foi um ganho muito grande na criação do Comitê de Abertura da Barra, porque a gente escuta, a gente avalia, escuta o outro, nem sempre a nossa verdade é a única, e para mim é esse um caminho, né, do comitê. Por isso que Eu falei isso da nossa APA, porque a nossa APA trouxe a possibilidade de ser criado esse espaço para todos nós sermos juntos trocando essa ideia. Né? E a questão da segurança foi um ganho muito grande. Morreu muita gente na nossa abertura de bar, enquanto não se tinha um comitê. Com o comitê agora, a gente tem essa segurança, enquanto o bombeiro vinha antecipado, a gente saber o dia que a barra vai abrir, o momento, falar para todas as pousadas, falar para os seus visitantes que agora é um momento perigoso de estar lá na barra. Então, isso foi um ganho muito grande também. A segurança, como exatamente ela falou. Só para complementar essa parte.
Obrigado, Cidinha. Aproveitando o gancho, né, Cidinha, é uma questão muito clara, assim, né? Quando ela coloca todos os exemplos aqui, a gente vê algo que é a nível global, né, outro país, são as mesmas coisas que a gente tem aqui, né? Mas aí a grande questão é que cada sistema tem a sua especificidade. Né?
As suas
Então, é
especificidades.
necessário um grupo local, mas também é necessária essa interação entre esses grupos locais.
Tem que ter, tem que ter. E os grupos locais, cada vez mais, a gente identificar quem é que fala, né, pelo cuidado e pelo bem coletivo do que pelos seus interesses pessoais. E isso é um risco que a gente corre, né? Porque bons intencionados e mal intencionados tem em todas as partes, em todos os nichos da sociedade.
Sempre brilhante participação. Cadê? Tinha uma moça que ia falar comigo.
De termos interesses mais intencionados.
Tudo bem. A transmissão está sendo feita em português. Não esquece de deixar o legenda.
Talvez eu apoie. Mas é que a gente vai ouvir.
Eu não sei.
Vocês têm acesso aí onde estão.